What's happening, Mississippi? You found the Sit Down with Russ Latino right here on MPB Think Radio, where we talk about the ideas and people that are shaping Mississippi's future. Today, we are delighted to be joined by Senator Jeremey England in the hot seat. It is March Madness. Lots going on the hardwood. I know that you're super excited that Ole Miss's men's and women's team have made it to the Sweet 16, knowing how much of an Ole Miss homer you are.
Right.
And but there's also a lot of madness going on in the state of Mississippi right now as the legislature winds down what has been a very interesting legislative session. How are you doing?
Doing good, Russ. Thanks for having me on this morning.
Yeah, thanks for being here. And I of course, am teasing about Ole Miss. Now that you are a senator, it means that you have to root for all of the Mississippi teams. But there was a point in time where you were a fairly large Mississippi State fan. Probably still are.
Still am. Still bleed maroon and white. But yeah, you remember me way back when I didn't have to do the political thing and root for everybody. But look, congratulations to Ole Miss, to your Rebels. That's great that they're advancing. And I would be wrong to tell you that I don't wish that my Bulldogs were doing better in athletics right now. But we'll get there.
I won't draw this out too long because I know it's painful. But there's got to be some credit in Mississippi for the job that Keith Carter's done at Ole Miss when you look at that athletic program. Lane Kiffin obviously competing at a very high level. Mike Bianco for a long time has competed at a high level with baseball. And then you've got both the men's and women's teams performing well in basketball. At some level, that's got to reflect on the AD.
That's right. Russ, did I tell you I was glad to be here this morning? Let me just say it one more time. I'm certainly glad to be sitting here talking Ole Miss sports with you this morning.
So we like to have light conversation.
That's right.
It's part of what we do.
Well, and look, I'm an Ole Miss law grad, right? So I've got a little.
You have a degree.
I've got a degree that hangs on the wall that says the University of Mississippi on it.
See, we actually have the exact same Ole Miss degree because I didn't go to undergrad at Ole Miss.
Okay.
I just I showed up in 2003 actually as a Mississippi State fan.
Wow.
Both of my sisters had attended Mississippi State and showed up in 2003 to go to law school, and it was Eli Manning's senior season. And started attending those games because, like student tickets are like nothing, right?
Right.
And so started attending those games. And I was like, oh, this Eli Manning thing's pretty cool.
Yeah. Well, see, I went there right after then whenever the Eli Manning years
were over.
Well, and had driven up the property costs of everywhere to live in Oxford. Having good sports in your college town really does great for the city of Oxford. And look, Starkville's had that benefit when we had Dak there. I mean, the growth that happens around a great program. And look, I think that we're going to get there. We've got a lot of young coaches at Mississippi State, new folks that are there. And look, we're only going to get better.
Yeah, look, I've spent a little bit of time at Neshoba a couple of years ago with Zach Selman, and he's a sharp guy.
He is.
And I do think you guys are on the right trajectory for what it's worth.
Right.
Not that we've made this an awkward Ole Miss Mississippi State thing now.
That's right.
So let's talk brass tacks. I have been talking on the radio for a while now about this concept of I don't need another daddy caucus, which I think is clever. I don't know if anybody else does.
Right.
But really the genesis of that is at the end of the day, I think individuals should have personal freedom. Mm-hmm. Adults should be treated like adults to make their own decisions, including on things that maybe some people turn their nose up at. Alcohol is a great example of that, right? I grew up Southern Baptist. Very much the thought process was that's not a good thing. Mm-hmm. But what we find in states that prohibit things like that is oftentimes they actually have worse problems because people haven't figured out how to use things responsibly.
That's right.
And so we talked on this program a decent amount about the wine shipping bill. Mm-hmm. You were not just part of the I don't need another daddy caucus on the wine shipping bill. You actually helped lead that, right?
That's right. Yeah, I handled the bill on the floor. Look, it was Senator Walter Michelle's bill, and he's worked on this for probably 10 years. So he is the absolute champion in the Senate for that. And then, of course, we had some great members of the House that worked on that, Shonda Yates and Britt Powell and Hank Zuber, other folks. And it all came together this year, and I was honored to be asked to handle that bill on the floor for the reasons that you mentioned, and I made the point from the well, we're one of only 3 states that don't do this, and every time I hear that, it's those little things. And look, Russ, you watch social media just like I do. I was told by many people, oh my gosh, this is what you're focusing on. Like, aren't there more important things? And my answer is, this is a little thing, but Russ, those little things add up to be a big thing for the state of Mississippi.
I don't think it's a little thing for this reason. Mm-hmm. I think there's nothing easier for people to understand than, hey, you're preventing me as an adult from having a bottle of wine shipped to my house. Like, You're not treating me like an adult. And so if you believe in personal freedom, that's actually a really easy to understand example of ways that government sometimes impinges upon personal freedom.
Right.
And to your point, my social media was not actually, I can't believe that you're talking about this.
Right.
My social media on this was like hundreds and hundreds of engagements of people saying, of course we should do this.
Right.
We ran a little poll. 95% of the respondents said that they thought they should have that ability. A 95% issue is unheard of.
That's right. Yeah, and look, that's fair, and that's what I was hearing too. And we hear this on a lot of issues, and a lot of times the legislature is kind of that last leg, and we're very slow under that. And I think the legislature should work slow on this, but we were wrong on that one to begin with. So we needed to make that change, and I'm really glad that we were able to get that done. And I am excited for folks that can now go to Napa Valley and North Carolina and other places and join these wine clubs and enjoy these things back at their home, because that's what they ought to be able to do.
You know, Louisiana may not be the greatest example to use, but I'll use Louisiana as an example. Obviously, they're much freer when it comes to access to alcohol.
Right.
But I will tell you, like, one of the arguments that I've always heard in Mississippi is, oh, this will hurt individual wine stores. That's not the case in Louisiana, where you can buy on Sundays and where you can go into a grocery store and buy, and you can get wine shipped, right? All of those things are doable there. There's still some really awesome wine shops in Louisiana,
yes.
Right? And there are places where you can go get wine and appetizers, and it's kind of like a social experience. And those places do very well. It strikes me that a lot of fear holds us back instead of thinking about things in terms of opportunity.
It does, and you hit the primary opponents to this right away, which was this is going to hurt my local package store, my mom and pop package store back at home, but what these other states have shown us is that when you have direct shipment of wine, you can go enjoy these wines in other places. The people who are going to go into those wine, into your package stores are going to stop buying the $8 bottle of wine. They're going to buy that $15 or $20 or $30 bottle of wine, because now they've got that more sophisticated palate. They've enjoyed this. They're having it shipped. And the other thing is, the wines that those stores are carrying are not the ones that you're going to pay the money to and incur the cost of shipping that to your home. These just tend to be a more specialty area kind of wine. And so, in my opinion, that is going to help those stores more. You're going to get more customers in that say, I'm going to go pick up this bottle of wine this evening,
Yeah, I think the potential for an expanded market is huge. I mean, I would make the same argument as an example of Alabama's experience with having wine in grocery stores, is that what happens is, you might buy a bottle of wine in a grocery store for a person that never went into a wine shop before. And then if they develop a taste for it, they start to think, well, my grocery store doesn't have the selection that guy has.
That's right.
Right? And so you actually are developing a new customer base by opening up the market a little bit.
That's right. That's right. And look, that's how things are supposed to work. And we shouldn't stand in the way of those models. And speaking of models, there are certain wineries that have a business model where they don't have their wines available in package stores. They only do direct ship. These more clean wines, the more organic type things, they may not be available even in those stores because their sales model doesn't do that. So now we've opened those up. So we've had to have a completely new market out there with this bill. So I'm excited about that too.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's a positive step. Another thing that I kind of put into the I don't need another daddy category is around mobile sports betting.
Right.
And I know this is one that we may not have perfect eye-to-eye agreement on.
Right.
But in my mind, you have a marketplace, one where people are already doing it and have been engaging in gambling on sports for as long as sports have been around.
Right.
And you've got a marketplace where my understanding is that most of the larger casino employers actually want mobile sports betting at this point. Mm-hmm. Give me a sense of where that idea stands, what the impediments are, the risk, I guess, that you're seeing in that idea.
So Russ, you're from the coast. You grew up
that
down
is
there.
Correct.
Right. And so I'm down there all the time now, and I see what a destination gaming type program we have and what it does for our community down there and the jobs that it creates. I've got folks that live in East Central that drive over to Gulfport in the morning for a great job they have at one of the casinos. And I'll tell you right now, that is my primary concern with it, is what are we going to see this evolve into? Are we going to see, mobile gaming, not just sports betting? And are we going to see mobile gaming? Are we going to see poker games and things like that on the phones? Because that's going to change our entire market. And what I want to make sure that we do is we have all or at least as many as possible, the casinos on board that understand, because they've made that investment. They've made that investment in our communities, and they're the job creators. And I want to make sure that they're okay with whatever we do. But I'll tell you another thing that bothers me, or that worries me. There's a reason why you can't sit at a blackjack table in Biloxi and hand the pit boss your credit card and say, hey, give me a bunch of chips here. You've got to go to the ATM. You've got to do that. It's a cash-based system. Well, once we put everything on the phones, we lose that, and that can create problems. And I just want to make sure that we're smart about this, that we're not rushing into it.
Yeah, I guess I watched a video of the Gaming Commission that met maybe 2 weeks ago, and this was a hot topic of conversation. And as I understood it, like the Beau Rivage and lots of the big casinos on the coast actually are in favor of mobile sports betting. Is that incorrect?
No, a lot of them are. There are some that are not. And I think the ones that are, they already have their market there. They've already got the apps. They've already got the skins. They're ready to roll. And the ones that are not, I don't even know if they have any interest in doing that.
Some of the ones that aren't, at least my understanding, actually have mobile gaming in other states where they have casinos.
Right. And what we have, and when in the mid '90s, when our casino market kind of came to be, we were looking at places like Atlantic City and Las Vegas and places like that. Well, now that this mobile sports book concept comes to play, we're being told, hey, you got to look at places like Tennessee and Arkansas and Louisiana. Well, they don't have what we have as far as tourism. And look, tourism is one of the biggest returns on investment that we have in the state. It's one of the biggest draws that we have in the state. And I just want to make sure that whatever we do, we're doing it smartly. And if that takes a little bit more time than folks wanting to, hey, we need this by March so I can bet on, Ole Miss basketball games, we might just take another year and look at it.
Don't worry, I've got a guy.
Okay, good. All right. I'm sure
I don't really have a guy.
That's right,
I don't really have a guy. I'm joking.
It sounds impressive when you say it. Right? Yeah. I've got a guy. Yeah.
Everybody's got a guy.
That's right.
You're listening to Sit Down with Russ Latino. It's time to take a break. We're talking with Senator Jeremey England today. We'll be right back.
The Mississippi legislative session is in the home stretch, and MPB's At Issue keeps you informed of the major developments.
What do Mississippians expect of their government?
It is a fascinating debate, and he and I could go back and forth for an hour on this.
But the truth is, we cannot just keep creating no accountability.
Join MPB's At Issue for interviews, analysis, and debate every Friday night at 6:30 on MPB Think Radio. Go to mpbonline.org/issue for podcasts and extended interviews. MPB, your stories, our mission.
You don't want to miss the next Mississippi Antique Showcase coming to Oxford, Mississippi, May 2nd and 3rd.
For a $100 donation, you can get a showcase ticket, complimentary food, cocktails, and an on-site appraisal, or a chance to be on the show. Or for $60, you can just come and be part of the party. Call 1-844-874-6874, visit mpbonline.org, or scan the QR code on your screen.
We can't wait to see you in Oxford for the next Mississippi Antique Showcase.
Hi, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Bobby Rush. As a blues man, I love Mississippi Public Broadcasting. If you support Mississippi music and their local programming, donate now, right now, and become a member today, not tomorrow. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Doesn't matter how big or small, but we prefer big. Thank you very much.
to the Sit Down with Russ Latino right here on MPB Think Radio. You can hear us every Wednesday at 10 a.m. on stations across the state, or you can watch us on the live stream on YouTube, or you can go to Spotify. I'm willing to transcribe it if you just want to read it. I mean, there's all sorts of ways to get involved in the conversation. We're talking today with Senator Jeremey England, Senate District 51, is that right?
That's right, Jackson County.
Down in Jackson County, where ships are built and Chevron does stuff, and it's a cool place.
It is, man. I love it down there.
And we were talking about casinos. Obviously, that became such a staple of the Mississippi Gulf Coast economy. Now 20-some-odd, 30 years ago, whatever the number is, right? Late 90s. The coast is such a cool place.
It is. It's great people. The food, look, being between Mobile and New Orleans, you're going to have great food. If you open a place that doesn't have good food, you're not going to be open very often, right? Very long. Just the atmosphere, the laid-back folks, the hospitality. I mean, I love it. It's such a great place.
Yeah, so I grew up eating at Little Ray's in Pirates Cove.
Right.
Was sort of the go-to spots for a good roast beef po' boy.
Right.
What's your po' boy spot down there?
So we've got two. And I grew up in Pascagoula, so Bozo's is going to be my favorite all time.
Bozo's is number one, and Bozo's 2 is number 2?
That's right. That's 1 and 2. And then, we've got a place right there, Fay Yards, that does a great po' boy. And
the pressed po' boy, right?
The pressed po' boy, dressed and pressed.
Yeah.
And so, shrimp is tough to miss, especially if you're visiting down there. You've got to go get a shrimp po' boy. But don't sleep on the sloppy roast beef po' boys at either one of those places and you got to roll your sleeves up. They're delicious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Inject it straight into my veins, man.
Right.
There's nothing better than going to a coast bar, sitting down, ordering a dozen raw oysters, having a cold beverage of your choosing.
Right.
There's something about that just from it increases relaxation by orders of magnitude.
It does, and we've got the most beautiful sunsets anywhere down there. Yeah, I'd put it up against anybody. And for my family, like we can go pick up a Fay Yards po' boy right there in St. Martin, drive to the Ocean Springs Beach, find a picnic table, and have dinner right there on the beach. I mean, we can do that in Mississippi. That's just such a great thing.
Well, and we're obviously at the 20-year anniversary of Katrina, and I can remember going down to the coast and just the devastation of Katrina. We talked about that a little bit last week in the context of the tornadoes that hit in Walthall County, but I remember that devastation. But I will tell you, you drive Highway 90 right now, and the coast came back in an incredible way, a really incredible way. And whether you're talking about Bay St. Louis or Pass Christian or Ocean Springs, there's some really cool artsy places down there that are worth seeing. If you're in Mississippi and you're like, hey, I want to go to Fairhope, go to Ocean Springs, right? Or go to Bay St. Louis.
That's right.
Because there's plenty to do in state.
Yes. Yeah. And look, the Peter Anderson Festival there in Ocean Springs, and we're bookended perfectly with Bay St. Louis and Ocean Springs, and then everything in between. And I've talked to people, Russ, that come down there and visit, and they might start in Bay St. Louis. And the great thing about the coast is they're going to say, hey, if you love it here, go check out Ocean Springs. And on your way, stop at the Orr O'Keefe Museum in Biloxi. Stop at one of the casinos on your way over there. Go stay at a boutique hotel somewhere. Go over to Pascagoula and go to the Point LaCreb's house and see the lighthouse. We all work so well together in the tourism industry down there. The Coastal Mississippi Tourism Group does a great job of that. I'm sorry, I don't want to forget to mention the aquarium, because that's also great, and have penguins down there. I think they just had a live birth penguin. That's the first one in the state of Mississippi not too long ago.
Is that right?
Yeah. So we have our first Mississippi penguin down there.
Penguin husbandry right here in Gulfport, Mississippi.
We're doing it.
Well, look, I say that just as an aside to say that obviously there are wonderful places throughout the state of Mississippi.
Oh, yes.
I do think the coast is one of the most marketable places in our entire state. Just from the amenities and the things that you can do, and then there's just a chill vibe, right? It's like you get north of I-10 or really north of I-20, and it's a little bit more how do I put it? Not stodgy, that's not the right word, but just a different vibe.
It is. And that's what makes Mississippi so great. We're I would argue the most diverse state in the country, and everywhere you go, they're going to say, hey, welcome to God's country, and nobody's wrong.
Sure.
It's so great. But I certainly, growing up on the coast, that's where my heart is. That's what I love. Walking out my door and being able to smell the salty air right there. I mean, it's wonderful.
Well, all of that is true.
That's right.
But let's get back to serious business.
Yes.
you have gotten involved with an issue, and it's not the income tax fight.
Okay. Right.
An issue related to pharmaceuticals, access to drugs,
Right.
The healthcare space, what's called PBM, right? Pharmacy benefit managers.
That's right.
And it has become a relatively controversial conversation.
It has.
Help me understand the genesis of that conversation. What's actually in dispute?
Yeah. So what's in dispute, in my opinion? So you have these PBMs, and they negotiate prices, and your big employers sometimes will negotiate prices of these prescription drugs. Well, your independent pharmacists, their argument is that they're not even being reimbursed properly due to the PBMs and these agreements that have been worked out. And they're not wrong. There needs to be some reform on PBM. But when I got involved is when I started realizing that our bill was going to try to out-regulate regulations, and you just can't do that, okay? But we were going to essentially step in and say, look, to our self-insurers and our big employers, our ERISA-based folks, that hey, you guys have negotiated these specific prices on behalf of your employees, but the state of Mississippi, we're going to pass a law that says those contracts are no longer in existence. And I don't like that. I don't like that principle, number one. But number two, if we can pass a bill that takes those folks out of the equation, right? It lets them have their ability to go do that and negotiate prescription drug costs and health care costs and do things like that that's more beneficial to them. And if we don't take them out, it could cost them tens of millions of dollars, and those are job-killing numbers. And these are job creators that are telling me this, so I'm listening to them.
Yeah, so just to back up a little bit, because I think a lot of people probably have never heard of a PBM or didn't know that it existed, maybe until recently. In the 1960s, health insurance companies basically said, you know what, we're going to start covering prescriptions.
Right.
And because of that, there needed to be somebody who said, hey, these are the right prescriptions for these conditions, and here's what you should pay for them, right?
Right.
And so essentially an industry rose up, the pharmacy benefit managers, to negotiate with drug manufacturers, hey, these are the drugs that are going to be assigned to these conditions.
That's right.
And here's what is going to be used to reimburse them. Or here's sort of what the payment looks like for those drugs. And so it became a service to insurance companies, but also a service, to your point, to big employers that self-insure.
That's right.
Which is what you refer to as ERISA, right? It's
right. That's right.
It's self-funded insurance, essentially.
That's it, yes.
So essentially, they became the middleman between the drug manufacturers and the payers, whether it was an insurance company or your employer. And the way that they get paid is they take rebates essentially from the drug manufacturers. 91% of that gets passed on to the employers. 9% stays with the PBM. And then they negotiate payment to individual pharmacies.
Right.
And so the argument against PBMs is that they're sending too little payment to the individual pharmacies and sending too much back essentially to the insurers. Is that?
Yeah, that's the argument. And look, and again, like I said, there's need for reform there on that system. But we don't have to lump in our self-insurers. We want our employers insuring their employees. We want them not only paying for prescriptions, but also paying for paying for health care. That's what we've always argued for. And it's just unfortunate to see those big employers being lumped into this fight. I just don't. I think we can do this and accomplish what needs to be accomplished without them being involved.
Yeah, no, it strikes me that when you've got literally the biggest employers in the state, people who collectively employ, hundreds of thousands of people,
right,
saying, hey, this is going to be a substantial cost to our business and our ability to continue to insure our employees.
Right.
That's something that the legislature should take into account in the same way that they should take into account the complaints of the independent pharmacist.
Absolutely.
And so there's a balancing act that has to occur here,
right,
where you can't just focus on one group to the harm of another.
Right.
Right. And I think that's part of the problem, if you will, that the legislature seems to be trying to crack.
That's right. And look, I'll say this. The state of Mississippi is essentially a self-insurer when it comes to this. And we don't know, we don't have a fiscal note on this bill. We don't know what it is going to cost the taxpayers of Mississippi if we pass this bill that says you can't, these contracts are no longer in existence. So that right there tells you it's an issue.
So I want to talk a little bit more about this, but we've got to take a quick break.
Okay.
We're talking with Jeremey England. Stay tuned. We're going to talk a little bit more about prescription drug prices, shift to income taxes, maybe even talk a little bit about election law. All coming up right here on the Sit Down with Russ Latino.
Hello, I'm Desiree Frazier, host of the award-winning news program, Mississippi Edition. We bring you conversations about the latest news from across the Magnolia State. Whether it's politics, healthcare, or education, you'll hear in-depth discussions on issues that matter to you. So join us each weekday morning at 8:30 on MPB Think Radio, or download the podcast, listen through the app, and online.
The Measuring Show.
Since 1970, MPB has been enriching the lives of Mississippians.
Everything we do gives us the chance to grow and learn.
With your support, we are always there whenever and wherever you need us. Together through the years, together in the future. Please consider making a donation at mpbfoundation.org. MPB, your stories, our mission.
Both seasons of the 10-Minute Timeout are now available on a variety of podcasting apps. The mini podcast can be binged in a day and is perfect for those that just want a quick listen. Join me, Lacey Alexander, as I sit down with special guests, revisit major moments, and give a platform to the athletes and sports that shape Mississippi. Head over to mpbonline.org to give it a try.
Sit Down right here on MPB Think Radio. I'm your host, Russ Latino, talking today with Senator Jeremey England. We're talking a little bit about prescription drug prices. Obviously, that's a real pain point for a lot of people, right? I mean, drugs are expensive. Part of that is just the R&D of getting a drug to market.
Right.
And part of what I think people don't realize, and Vivek Ramaswamy had a good post about this the other day, is like, the United States puts all the cost into research and development, and then other countries essentially piggyback on the fact that we did the research. And a lot of folks don't understand that for every drug that makes it to market, there are a bunch where millions, if not billions of dollars go into development.
Right.
And sometimes they strike out.
That's right.
Right. And so it's not 100% success rate in terms of getting a drug to market, but there's an awful lot of expense associated with it.
Right.
It's one of the reasons, one, we've got access to the most cutting-edge innovation in the world, in the United States, but simultaneously it's really expensive. I think when we talk about things like insurance companies or PBMs, the natural inclination of a lot of people is to look at it and say, well, those are the bad guys, right? And maybe sometimes is the answer.
Absolutely.
Maybe sometimes. But it's a very complicated picture. Our healthcare system has become extremely complicated, candidly, as government has gotten more involved, and just the complexity of the system is incredible. And so I think people hear, hey, we want to go and attack an insurance company or we want to go and attack a PBM, and don't realize that there are unintended consequences associated with that, including potentially much more expensive pharmaceuticals.
That's right, for the consumer, right? Because, and again, regulation always costs money. We saw that with the federal government when they did Dodd-Frank. They were going, oh, well, this is going to be great for small bankers out there, and it killed more than it helped. And we've just got to be careful with that. Where do we stop? And at what point do we allow those costs to, or do we overregulate to where we increase those costs? And you're absolutely right about the R&D situation. Drugs are expensive to develop, and this is just another instance of where I think, there's that great chart out there that shows where costs have increased on certain items and decreased on others. Well, prescription drugs have obviously increased over time, and some of that's because we're getting new drugs that are out there that are more expensive to produce, but some of it's because government got involved, and we've just we can try to fix things to where we really hurt them sometimes.
Yeah, and look, I think it's important to say that nobody either in this conversation or outside of this conversation looks at it and says we want to see independent pharmacies hurt.
Absolutely.
We want independent pharmacies in our communities to thrive. It just can't be at the expense of job creators, of consumers. We've got to figure out a way to crack that nut without doing damage outside of a singular industry.
That's right.
And I think that's the risk that's being undertaken right now is if you guys go forward with a bill that in its current form, that you're in a situation where you potentially are costing people their insurance through employers. You're in a situation where you're potentially costing people jobs, and you're in a situation where you're potentially costing people more money on prescriptions.
Absolutely. Look, if we're going to do something that's going to cost our biggest employers, say $50 million, well, what does that $50 million look like? It looks like, well, we're not going to do any more bonuses this year. We're not going to do any more hirings. We're not going to build that new development warehouse where we're going to be building this new product and doing that. I mean, that's real things that really can impact people. I mean, that's a lot of money that you're talking about there. I mean, that could hurt jobs, but you're absolutely right. Nobody wants to see independent pharmacists hurt. And on social media, it's so easy for people to get very angry and say things that they wouldn't normally say. I'll say this about my independent pharmacists. They know me. They've reached out to me. They know that they disagree with me on this issue, but they know that I'm doing my homework up here, and then I'll sit down and talk with them. It's the ones that don't know me that it's so easy for them to say, hey, you're uneducated. You don't know what you're talking about. You're bought and paid for is the typical line. Sure. And that's not the case. We don't want to hurt independent pharmacists. I'm not an enemy to independent pharmacists, but we can't just rush a bill through based on that because the consequences are there.
Yeah, I mean, look, I wrote an article about this a couple of days ago in the Magnolia Tribune, and really it was just saying just beware of unintended consequences when you start messing with things that are this complex.
That's right. It was a great article. I read it. You did a good job laying out this very complicated
thank you.
Topic, yes.
But the response that I got, to your point, was a lot of Mississippi pharmacists reached out and in very reasonable ways said, hey, I think you're wrong about this, consider this, and made good points, things that are worth considering. But then I also got a fair amount of, well, clearly you're on the dole and things of that nature that one, aren't true and two, really aren't helpful.
That's right.
But, a lot of that was coming from a guy in Alabama.
Yeah.
A pharmacist in Puerto Rico.
Right.
Like, I was telling you off air, I got invited to do a debate on a national podcast just because I wrote an article saying, beware of unintended consequences.
Right.
There is this larger sort of fight going on that is not just a Mississippi fight. And I think a lot of the vitriol is coming from folks outside of the state.
It is. Well, it's easy to do that, right? Because like I said, it's the folks that don't know me, that don't know my family. And look, I use a small independent pharmacist when I go in, and I've had these conversations with them when I'm in there because we need to talk about it, and we need to do it reasonably to make sure that we're doing this right. The worst thing to do is to get in a boxing rink and say things that make sure that everybody goes into their corner and then just fight about it. That doesn't accomplish anything. And even whoever wins, quote unquote, wins the bill, whatever bill passes, whoever's happy, even they're going to see some of those unintended consequences.
Yeah, you guys take on so much in a session, and there have been times when I've thought to myself, wouldn't it be better if you went into the session and said, here are the 10 things that we're going to do this year.
Right.
And we're going to do an awful lot of research on each one of them. We're going to make sure that we've heard from every stakeholder. we're going to do a lot of work to make sure that we're getting these 10 things right. Because oftentimes what happens, let's say you take on 500 things. Really, it's more than that in terms of the number of bills that get filed. But,
that's right.
You know, by the end of it, it's a lot of, hey, we just got to trust that we're right on this versus knowing whether or not you're right. And you said something earlier, and I'm not trying to demean what you guys do, just Russ's personal preference would be more focus.
Right.
You said something earlier that really resonates with me, which is that there's no fiscal note on this bill. And I will tell you, that's been a pain point for me on a lot of different legislation, not just this year, but historically, because most states, their fiscal note process is a good bit easier.
Right.
It happens. Like just as a course of business, fiscal notes are applied to bills. We don't do that in Mississippi. There have to be requests in order to get that done. Oftentimes those requests are not taken as a helpful thing. They're seen as a hostile maneuver. Hey, if you're requesting a fiscal note on my bill, it means that you're trying to
kill the bill. Yeah.
You're trying to mess with me.
Right.
I think citizens, if they understood that, would be a little alarmed that, like, hey, we're talking about something with implications in the tens to hundreds of millions of dollars. Wouldn't we want to know whether or not, you know, this is a good decision?
That's right. Well, because that shows you that even this decision is going to have an impact on, you know, your average taxpayer in the state of Mississippi. Whether they're an independent pharmacist or whether they work for one of your big employers, they're still going to be impacted by this. And look, knowing the rules in that building is one of the major things. You can do a lot. You know, you can either be a great help or you can really be a cog in the wheel or a stick in the wheel, I should say, if you know the rules. And I think way back when requesting a fiscal note kind of became that, like, hey, I want to shut this down, I'm going to request a fiscal note. And we need to get away from that. We need to get back to the point where, look, we just want to know what this is going to cost the taxpayers of Mississippi.
Yeah, you know, I think about things like hearings too. I mean, I think you guys have done more hearings than maybe what was being done in the past. But there are times when I watch hearings, and I'm not going to point out any specific one or any specific chamber, but there are times when I watch hearings where I think, you know, there are experts who would be able to tell you something different, right? And so there is sort of this confirmation bias sometimes that occurs in some of these big debates where it's natural to only pull in people who are going to confirm what we already believe or what we want to do,
right,
versus hearing from a lot of different voices and making sure we're not making a misstep. Because the problem is when you cut that dissenting voice out, I mean, they could be wrong, right?
That's right.
But they could also bring up something that you never thought of.
Yes.
And so I think this debate over PBMs is a good example of this, where it's very easy just to side against the insurance guys, but there's potentially a lot of harm involved in it.
There is, and you're absolutely right on the hearings. And look, if you're so set in your opinion and in your in your core beliefs, challenging those should actually increase your feeling on those beliefs, right? I mean, it should confirm what you've done. And if it doesn't, don't be stubborn. You know, back away from it. And we need to do that. The more voices you have at the table, whether you agree with them or disagree with them, you're going to get a better piece of legislation doing that.
So obviously, there's been a lot of conversation last week about the income tax bill, sort of what went down to get to the point that HB 1 got passed and sent to the governor. My personal view is that I'm not unhappy that it got sent to the governor, right? I think it's one of those things where it is a historic achievement. Both chambers have worked a long time towards this. I think a lot of credit is due to Representative Trey Lamar and Senator Josh Harkins for good work that's been put in. My personal view is that some of the rhetoric around the mistake and the Senate proposal is overblown. And I want your thoughts on this, but I'll tell you really quickly why I think they're overblown. I mean, one, you have until 2030 to fix it.
That's right.
Two, there's no reason you couldn't fix it now if you wanted to fix it now.
That's right. So
I'm curious.
Yeah, look, so yes, there was a mistake in the bill, but here's my issue with that. If it was known that mistake was in the bill, there are so many ways to fix that at the time. You know, you were once an attorney, you know.
I technically still am. I'm licensed.
You were once a practicing attorney, and congratulations on getting out of that world, by the way. But you know, when you're negotiating on something, you know, first that goes through, you know, verbal communications. You representing your client, the other attorney's doing that, and then you have that email where it's like, okay, hey, here's our final agreement. This is what we agree on, and then you get to the drafting of the settlement documents. Well, what we have here is in those settlement documents that we sent over, a mistake. that obviously was something that I think the House wanted to accept the bill, and we do a lot of great things in the bill to get hung up on some little mistake, and now that's all anybody's talking about, and it's just not a good look on anybody. And look, I certainly hate it for Senator Josh Harkins, who put a ton of work into this, and now he feels like, well, shoot, I might have let my chamber down because I sent this mistake over there, and that's not what he did. It was, look, when you're writing down, and what it was 85%. Well, when you write that down, you write down 85%. When you put it in a calculator, you put 0.85, right? So somewhere in the translation when it was being drafted, and who knows where the drafting error, when it happened or who did it. But the point is, it was caught, and that could have been fixed. And I think that has taken away, that little detail has taken away on how historic this accomplishment is for the state of Mississippi.
Yeah, I guess I have a different point of view in that I think it's still pretty historic, right? And I think the legislature was on the precipice of doing something historic. I think passing HB 1 locks in that this is going to happen. The only question is, what do modifications look like at this point? And I don't think that's a bad thing necessarily for taxpayers. But I also don't look at it and go, oh, gosh, the Senate bungled this. In my mind, to your point, it's a complex drafting error. It's something that can be fixed in the next 5 years. Right. So sort of the impending doom and gloom just seems silly to me. Right. We've got to take a break. We'll come back and talk a little bit more about this. You're listening to The Sit Down with Russ Latino, talking with Senator Jeremey England.
You don't want to miss the next Mississippi Antique Showcase coming to Oxford, Mississippi, May 2nd and 3rd.
For a $100 donation, you can get a showcase ticket, complimentary food, cocktails, and an on-site appraisal, or a chance to be on the show. Or for $60, you can just come and be part of the party. Call 1-844-874-6874, visit mpbonline.org, or scan the QR code on your screen.
We can't wait to see you in Oxford for the next Mississippi Antique Showcase.
Both seasons of the 10-Minute Timeout are now available on a variety of podcasting apps. The mini podcast can be binged in a day and is perfect for those that just want a quick listen. Join me, Lacey Alexander, as I sit down with special guests, revisit major moments, and give a platform to the athletes and sports that shape Mississippi. Head over to mpbonline.org to give it a try.
The Mississippi legislative session is in the home stretch, and MPB's At Issue keeps you informed of the major developments.
What do Mississippians expect of their government?
It is a fascinating debate, and he and I could go back and forth for an hour on this.
But the truth is, we cannot just keep creating no accountability.
Join MPB's At Issue for interviews, analysis, and debate every Friday night at 6:30 on MPB Think Radio. Go to mpbonline.org/issue for podcasts and extended interviews. MPB, your stories, our mission.
Down with Russ Latino right here on MPB Think Radio, talking with Senator Jeremey England. He just looks like a Cheshire cat right now. He's happy. He's over there happy. We were talking about the income tax thing before the break, My take on it is this. You've got a reduction of the flat income tax rate down to 3% by 2030, which is something the Senate had proposed.
That's right.
Which is like a $647 million annualized cut. That's
a big cut. It is.
A reduction in the grocery tax down to 5%.
That's right.
I think
From 7
it's
to 5. Yeah.
like a $127 million tax cut.
Right.
So these are real numbers. I mean, these are big numbers. And then you guys are putting $200 million back into roads and bridges.
Right.
In addition to what's already there.
Right.
And then you tried to fix PERS with the Tier 5. Now, I think that still needs some work, but Daniel did some good work there.
Yes.
Senator Sparks. So I would look at it and say, on net, that's something to be proud of. Figuring out how you do triggers starting in year 2031 is something you have time to do.
That's right. We have time to come back and look at it. And we don't have to, march off some fiscal cliff if something happens between now and then. Because I know there's a lot of uncertainty, with what's going on in the federal government right now and things like that. I mean, we're always going to be there to look at it. And yes, a decimal point is something that can easily be fixed between now and 2031, certainly.
So one of the issues that I thought would get more attention this session that kind of fell by the wayside a little bit were some of the election reforms that you had proposed. One of them got a lot of attention on early voting. And reasonable minds, I think, can differ on the best approach to that. I mean, there's a scenario in which I look at our current system and say we kind of already effectively have early voting. We just call it absentee voting.
That's right.
But some of those bills to me are just no-brainers where I can't see the argument against saying that somebody running for mayor has to turn in paperwork so citizens can see where they got money and how they spent it.
That's right. I had three very good campaign finance reform bills that we got through. When they got to the House, they got double referred, which is just a tough thing to overcome. And they died in committee. It didn't even get brought up in the second committee. But yeah, one of the things we were going to do was require everybody. I heard Secretary of State Secretary Watson mention it this way: from dog catcher up to governor, we want to see who's donated to your campaign and how you're spending your money. And that's transparency. That's a good thing. And that was going to be available online. We had another one that said foreign entities cannot donate to ballot measures. Now, I know we don't have a statewide ballot initiative right now, but we have local ones, and we eventually will have that back. So it's very important to know that we don't have foreign nationals kind of driving the conversation with a bunch of money on those things. So that was one, and we had several of them, and they just didn't make it this year.
Yeah, no, it's crazy to me because, as an example, a couple of years ago, one of the major political parties just didn't turn in their qualifying paperwork on time. In fact, I think they didn't turn it in until the next day.
Right.
They may have emailed a list like 3 or 4 hours late, but the actual formal documents didn't get turned in until the next day. And the response to that was, yeah, this is illegal, but there's no punishment for it. There's no consequence to it. And so we've got an election code that is a campaign finance code and an election code that in a lot of ways is largely toothless.
That's right.
And it's just crazy to me, like on the municipal candidate piece, it's crazy to me having gone through this with the city of Jackson recently, where you've got a mayor who for 3 years just didn't bother turning in the paperwork he's required to turn in.
Right.
When he does finally turn it in, it's missing like $80,000 or something, right? Huge chunk of change that's unaccounted for, and then you've got just random entries for like $25,000 for canvassing, with no vendor, no address, nothing. So all this stuff that just, to me, smacks of, hey, this is a real problem, right? Like if you actually care about transparency, if you care about how money's getting spent, it's a real problem. And then it took me 7 days to get the city of Jackson to give it up, and I had to do a public record request.
Right.
Which to me, no member of the public, now I can do that, I know how to do it, but no member of the public should have to go through that. It should just be publicly available.
That's right. Well, like we talked a minute ago, one of the common criticisms that we get as politicians, like, oh, you're bought and paid for. Well, not only am I not bought and paid for, but you can go look at my stuff, But to be fair, if somebody is, if you don't like who's donated to my campaign, or you want to see who, X, Y, or Z is donating to, that should be available, and you shouldn't have to go through that many hoops to do it. I have to put it online. I have to submit a form. The mayors of every town, aldermen, everybody should have to do that.
So we're going to do 5 quick questions.
Right.
You ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. We do this every week, so there's no pressure. There's a lot of pressure. Biscuits or cornbread?
Biscuits. Well, it depends on the topping, of course, or what you're going to have it with, but I'll go biscuits.
Okay, you're driving 95 miles an hour in your Ford Raptor.
Right.
And you look down at the radio. What are you jamming out to?
Well, lately it's been Dwight Yoakam.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Sweet tea or unsweet tea?
Sweet tea.
Something you're reading right now that's interesting?
I am reading The Guns of August about World War I. It's a great book.
Okay. Author? Oh, I put you on the spot. I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
Check out Guns of August.
It's Guns of August. It's a great book. Great
there you go. One hidden gem in Mississippi people should know about?
Ooh, just one, huh?
Just quick.
Okay. The Capitol building, if you haven't visited, you need to come by and check it out.
It is beautiful.
Yes.
I've got a sixth.
What's six?
The sixth one is not a question. I just want to congratulate you.
Yes.
On your Mississippi Association Broadcaster
third
place award for the sit down.
First next year, baby.
That's
First
right.
Next year. First or bust.
We're gunning.
You've been listening to The Sit Down. It's a production of Mississippi Public Broadcasting Think Radio, funded by generous contributions from listeners like you. Today's show was produced by Germaine Flood, with live stream by Abram Nanny and Joseph Hall. For my special guest, Jeremey England, I'm Russ Latino. We'll be back next week at 10 a.m. Stay tuned for Southern Remedy right here on MPB Think Radio at 11 a.m.